This week on the GCN Racing News Show, in the absence of Paris Roubaix, we're going to take a look at how Mathieu Van Der Poel may have fared in his debut at the race and which monument has gone the longest without a home winner. We'll also have a look at the Zwift race where riders of Team Ineos went head to head and all the other race related news as well. We seem to be saying this type of thing every week now, as the races would have been coming thick and fast at this point in the season. So yesterday, we should have been glued to our screens watching Paris Roubaix unfold in glorious sunshine, riders covered in dust as they rattle across the cobblestones of northern France. Now unfortunately, I never rode Paris Roubaix. However, I did ride the cobbled stage of the 2010 Tour de France, where I finished in a surprisingly high 125th. Just ahead of Roubaix stalwart Ruben Plaza, who rode the race twice but didn't finish either time. So I think it's fair to say I can speak with some authority on this particular topic. Undoubtedly, one of the stories we would have been covering would have been Mathieu Van Der Poel, who was supposed to be taking part for the very first time. Now, given his performances last year at the Tour of Flanders and Amstel Gold, his ability to handle his bike on seemingly any terrain, and just the plain fact that he is Mathieu Van Der Poel, he would have been one of the favourites for the race, and that despite the fact that he has never ridden it before. Which brings us on to our poll for this week. Where do you think Mathieu Van Der Poel would have finished at Paris Roubaix yesterday? You can find a link to that poll on your screen right now. Now, just the fact that Van Der Poel would have started as the bookmaker's favourite is, in itself, pause for thought. Because we covered in last week's show, Paris Roubaix is the hardest classic and riders don't generally arrive at this race and succeed straight away. In fact, you have to go back right the way to 1953 to find the last debut winner of the race. That was Germain Deric. The best debutant in the 2019 edition, for example, was Davide Ballerini, who finished down in 31st position. If you take all the winners of the race for the past 50 years and take an average of where those winners finished in their first Roubaix, it's 36th place. A credible result for a debutant, but in Paris Roubaix, it's probably the 5th or 6th group on the road. So a metaphorical and probably a literal mile away from coming close to winning the thing. And that's just an average of the first time those riders finished the race. Plenty of them didn't finish the first time that they actually raced it. Now famously, Tom Boonen finished third in his debut in 2002 and obviously then went on to win the race 4 times after that. But he is very much the exception. The last rider to finish in the top 10 on their debut was Martin Mascant back in 2008. The only rider in the past 50 years to go one better than Boonen in their debut was Francesco Moser. He finished second back in 1974 and then went on to win the race 3 times in a row. So, if Van Der Poel had won this year's Roubaix, or indeed goes on to win it whenever he does eventually make his debut, it would truly be an exceptional feat, and would add to the family history in this race. His father, Adrie Van Der Poel, finished on the podium in 1986. He was also the highest Dutch finisher at Paris-Roubaix on 3 separate occasions. That one in 1986, as well as 1990 and then 1993. Now, it may not seem like much of an honour to be the first rider from a particular country in the race, and perhaps for Dutch riders in Paris-Roubaix it may not be, but for French riders in Paris-Roubaix it may have some meaning. It has become kind of a thing over the last few years for the French sports newspaper L'Équipe, after each stage of the Tour de France, to keep track on who is the highest placed French rider overall. Although it has become less relevant really in more recent years, because they've had the likes of Bardet and Pinot, who've looked like genuine contenders for the overall. This kind of French-only ranking has slowly but surely become necessary because it's been so long since a French rider last won the Tour de France. That last French winner in their own race remains Bernard Hinault in 1985, so 35 years ago. However, as the years tick by, they're in danger of having to resort to the same kind of thing for Paris-Roubaix as well. There have been 22 editions of the Queen of the Classics now without a French winner, the last one being Frédéric Guédon way back in 1997. But 22 years isn't quite the longest stretch there has ever been without a home win in one of the monuments. It's actually 24 years, which, sadly for French riders, was also at Paris-Roubaix. The significance of that 24-year gap wasn't lost on the rider who broke the streak in 1981, Bernard Hinault. Of the other monuments, the longest stretch of bad news for the home riders came in Milano-San Remo in the 16 years between 1954 and 1969. But Paris-Roubaix passed out that mark in 2014 and it's still going. On the flip side, amazingly, there's never been more than 4 years that have passed without a Belgian winner of the Tour of Flanders. Now, when Gaydon won Paris-Roubaix in 1997, he was only 25 years old. And although he had won a very minor race a few weeks beforehand at the Haribo Classic, that sweet taste of success aside, Paris-Roubaix was practically his first professional win. A win in Paris Tour came almost 10 years later, but he basically dined out on that Roubaix win for his entire career. And Roubaix was the race that he would focus on every single season. He even chose to make it his last race before he retired mid-season in 2012. So, while L'Équipe haven't quite started keeping track of the best French rider in Paris-Roubaix the way they have done at the Tour, we here at GCN are going to do that right now. During his career, Gaydon was best French finisher at Paris-Roubaix on 7 occasions. The most recent one in the year just before he retired, 2011, where he finished 11th. And sadly, 11th is about par for best French rider these days. Since Gaydon's win in 1997, despite some decent contenders taking part in recent years like Florian Sénéchal and Arnaud Démare, the average placing of best French finisher in that time has been 11.8. The worst was 26th and the best was 2nd. That was Sébastien Turgot behind Tom Boonen in 2012. And that has been the only podium finish for a Frenchman since Gaydon's win. However, Gaydon's tally of 7 as France's best finisher at Paris-Roubaix isn't the most. In the 124-year history of the race, the French rider who has finished as best French rider for the most times is a name that might surprise you, as he was far better known for his exploits at the Tour de France. It was Raymond Poulidor. And it might not surprise you to learn, given the somewhat unfair nickname that he has of the Eternal Second, that in spite of being best French finisher 8 times, he never won. He never finished on the podium either, actually. His best performance was 5th back in 1962. More Paris-Roubaix family history for the Van Der Poels, as Poulidor was Mathieu's grandfather. Some other choice nuggets which stood out amongst the numbers crunched by the GCN stats nerds were that Francesco Moser was the top Italian finisher at Paris-Roubaix an astonishing 12 times. The top Belgian finisher record is jointly held by probably the 3 most successful Belgians ever to ride the race. Tom Boonen, Johan Museeuw and Roger de Vlaming all finished as top Belgians 7 times. And perhaps the most peculiar stat amongst it all was that the top Italian finisher at the 1989 Paris-Roubaix was Claudio Chiappucci. Thanks very much to those stat nerds for that. I hope you found it as interesting as I did. We are going to move on to some actual racing now, albeit virtual. Team Ineos riders went head-to-head on Zwift yesterday, the 30 riders competing in teams of 5 over a 25-kilometre route, which finished up the Alpe de Zwift. It was an interesting insight into the current fitness levels of their riders, and the one who appears to be the fittest of them all at the moment is Rowan Dennis, the World Time Trial champion. He took flight early on the Alpe, pushing well over 450 watts in his garage in Andorra, and nobody else was able to get close to him. It was actually quite a large margin of victory for Dennis as well, almost a minute clear of Eddie Dunbar, who finished 2nd in his kitchen, and Michał Kwiatkowski, who finished 3rd. It is worth bearing in mind though that it wasn't a level playing field, quite literally in fact. Egan Bernal is back at home in Colombia, for example, and at that altitude it's not so easy to put the watts out. Now this brings us quite nicely onto last week's poll, in which we asked you your thoughts on virtual bike racing. Most of you, 48%, said that you will watch it if there's no real racing, 28% of you said that you're trying but can't get into it, 15% of you love it, and 9% of you hate it. Has your opinion changed though since the Team Ineos race on Zwift? You can let us know in the comment section down below. We're going to move on to a few other bits of news now. So Team Ineos haven't just been busy racing, but also producing and delivering bottles of hand sanitizer to hospitals across the UK. Now it's been coined the Hands On initiative, and it was started by Sir Jim Radcliffe just 10 days ago. Distribution has now started, with the aim being to eventually produce 1 million bottles. Once hospitals have got enough there, they will aim to make them available to the general public as well. Dylan Groenewegen has, like Davide Martinelli in Italy, been delivering essential medicine and food to those most in need, but of course in his home country, which is the Netherlands. Surely one of the speediest deliveries you're ever going to get. Meanwhile, back here in the UK, Tom Pidcock has taken on the #Roller 10 Wednesday challenge, which was started by British coach Stuart Blunt. Quite a simple one. All you've got to do is ride 10 miles as fast as you can on a set of rollers. You can all try it, but none of us are likely to be able to get as fast as Mr. Pidcock. Here he is at the end of his effort, where he did an average cadence of 155 for the 12 minutes and 39 seconds that it took him to complete the distance, which was an average speed of 76 kilometers per hour. Impressive stuff. The aim, should you want to take part, is to do it on a 52 or 53/14 gear. Let us know how you get on if you do it. Meanwhile, UAE Team Emirates' Sebastian Milano has been keeping his sprint going whilst having to train indoors. Not sure what the power was there, but it looks like it was pretty high. CCC's Michael Schär has been taking things a little more leisurely though in Switzerland. That is my kind of indoor training. And finally, Chris Hoy has improvised to make a mini velodrome for his kids outdoors, and Geraint Thomas had a pre-race haircut, which he offered to donate to Steve Cummings. Right, that is all for this week's Racing News Show. I'll see you all again in a week's time. Don't forget to tune into the GCN show tomorrow, and if you haven't yet downloaded the GCN app, what are you waiting for? You can find a link to that on your screen right now.